Today of our revenue and financing policy. A warm welcome to our members of the public who will be sharing their thoughts and ideas with us today. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. And just for practicalities, when I call your name, I've got a list of submitters. Just come forward and join me here. The microphone will be on and you will have 5 minutes to share with us. And there might be a few questions, but the process is that this is just us listening to you today. This is not a debate, but thank you so much for being with us today. We've got a few formalities to go through first, and then we'll start with our hearings. I do have an apology from Councillor Cranston, moved by Councillor Wharehinga, seconded by Councillor Dowsing. All in favour, contrary, carried. No declarations of interest. I've got a leave of absence for Councillor Foster. Do I have a mover? Councillor Sheldrake, seconded Councillor Seymour. All in favour, contrary, carried. No acknowledgements and tributes, no public input and petitions, no extraordinary business, no notice of motion, no adjourned business. So this brings us to why we are here today, to listen to our public in regards to our revenue and financing policy. So first up, I'm going to call Mr. Russell Snow from Beetham, and that is submission number 155, councillors. Good morning, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. Please take a seat. You can just leave them out, you can be a metre away.
Sit down?
You can sit down or stand, just what works best for you.
Okay.
And the floor is yours, and I'll give you, when there's about 1 minute left, I'll just give you a little more.
Okay, good morning, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this submission. I'm the finance manager for Beetham Village. We're a community organisation home to 236 elderly residents. I want to speak today because this is going to have quite a dramatic effect on our operations. We're already paying a significant amount, as indicated to you. This policy alone would add another 34,000 to our operations. And when we think of the impact that a possible rate increase arising from the budget round, and also in terms of the revaluation, we could be looking at an increase of up to around about $100,000. We are a community-based organisation, as I say, looking after 236 residents. We also employ a number of staff. Our operations, we obviously are looking after these people and trying to do the best for them. This will be an added burden, and due to the way we've been set up, we're only able to increase the fees by the cost of living. This means that this cost will sit directly with the owners of the operation. Also, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has had quite an impact on our operations, and that's created a considerable burden to us in these uncertain times. This is just another added burden that I believe we could do without. I believe council should consider the wider effect on the business community and the operations that's likely to have on them. If you've decided to proceed with the policy, we would prefer that it could be spread over a longer period. But our submission to you is that we believe this should not proceed, and we should stick with the existing policy. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Next, I will welcome Judy Campbell and Yvette from Manaki Tairāwhiti. So that is submission 153. It's in this pack. So if you just take a look, the second one. Morning. Morning. You've got that. Okay. Please look for me too. Morning. Was yours.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought I had 40 minutes to catch my breath.
Number 2 on the list.
Good morning, everybody. Apologies from our chairs, Bron Nepe and Wayne Panapa, who are at a whānau ora meeting today, and Jim Green, who's out of town, and Moira Brown, who's out of town. So this is a submission on behalf of Manaaki Tairāwhiti, which, as you know, represents a number of social development agencies. You've got the submission in front of you, so in the interest of time, I've just highlighted a couple of things. So the things that we want to submit on is a general statement about rates affordability, and that while council usually talks about rates in terms of percentage increase that year, that the reality is, of course, that the rates are increasing year on year and are compounding as they increase. So we would like you to take note that that means that while there's been a little bit of population growth recently, that rates have been increasing at a far greater rate than the population has been increasing. I don't have enough facts and figures to quote local GDP and inflation, but I have looked at that in the past. And as you know, the last 20 years have been a relatively low inflation environment, and our local GDP has not been increasing in any great way, which means, in effect, the same people are wearing, with the same amount of money, the increase in the rates. And that over time, what that means, so this is only a 20-year graph, and it takes the rates from just over 20 million to just under 60 million, which is a trebling of the rates on the same population who have the same amount of money in their pockets. So our overall recommendation is around not increasing rates in the way that you have been. This is a graph that may be a little bit hard to read, but that's the percentage of rates increases over time. So each year, you know, a 2% rates increase or a 5% rates increase or 5 or whatever is the blue line, but the orange line is the rate at which population has increased. So in other words, negligible population increase that year. So cumulatively, the last census said there was a slight increase in population. But say in the years in which you've raised rates, there has not been the same proportion of population increase. Furthermore to that point, the way in which rates are affordable is disproportionately impacting on low income and Māori households. And that's because particularly the fixed rates, so fixed rates, UAGC and other fixed rates, go across, as you know, every household. But the ability to pay that fixed rate is significantly different per household. You won't be able to see it up there, but it's in your papers. That's the region broken down by area. The bottom line is Wainui and the top line is Ruatoria. The blue line is household income, and the number at the side is proportion of Māori in that little block. So I have to without to read it too. So a Wainui household has an average of 85,000 a year and has 17% Māori living in the Wainui area. A Ruatoria household has under 50,000 and is, I think that's 87% Māori. So applying the same fixed rate to the household in Ruatoria or East Cape or Te Karaka or Kaiti, compared to putting that rate into the household in Wainui, has a significantly different impact. And that's illustrated by these tables. There is actually a typo in one of the figures, which I'll come to, and we'll correct it straight to Heather or Louise. But it's taking that median household So the median household income and looking at the proportion of the percentage of spend in that household that's on household matters, including rates. So, and this table kind of average illustrates if you use different figures, you get different results, and people tend to use averages. So average household disposable income says that the percentage of household spending is 26%. But actually, if you looked at medians and you looked at equivalized disposable income, you might get as high as 54%. So equivalized, you know, I know you understand the difference between average and median, but an equivalized household income is taking the difference between, say, a single person household where they've got $50,000 versus a household that's got a $50,000 income and 5 people live in the household. So again, disproportionately impacting on Māori households who have large numbers in the house and relatively low incomes versus, say, single Pākehā with just themselves to look after, or a dual income household. This one is about the capital value of those households. So median household income versus the percentage of the fixed rates as a portion of that income. And as you can see, places like Kaiti South, Mangapapa and Patuupoko are much more, a greater proportion of their household income is being spent on rates itself. So we all know the way in which poverty is spread in the region. But to say, because fixed incomes takes fixed rates, UAGC in particular takes no notice of that, it means that the poor pay a much greater percentage of household income on council matters. So our recommendation is to reduce overall rates, but also to look at them as the proportion that are fixed rates, particularly the UAGC. We understand completely that council's budget increases over time, but we honestly think that you need to think more about how people can afford to pay rather than what you need to do things. I talked about being in a non-inflationary environment. Council often talks about a local government consumer price index that takes into account things like the price of bitumen is rising, but that still doesn't change the fact that the households in your community have not had those increases in pay that would allow them to pay the increasing rate of bitumen. That means our recommendation is basically that you prioritise and take some things out of your plans so that you don't have to charge them. We also understand that everything on your list is important, but that's true of life. You know, it still comes down to a point where you have to say, what is the least worst thing that I can take off this list? Not, here's a bunch of things that are nice to haves and it's easy to cut them below a line. We understand that this is a difficult task, but we, on behalf of your ratepayers, are saying there's a significant portion of your ratepayers for whom your rates are becoming a bigger and bigger burden. So look at those fixed rates, look at the UAGC, look at ways in which you can tag rates to capital value, and that way you would, if you are increasing rates, have at least people who have an increasing value that allows them to pay those rates. Just very briefly, because this is not a discussion on housing, but it is a discussion on how council revenue and financing policy impacts on housing shortages. So this is the Ministry of Social Development's housing waiting list. And as you can see, there was a really significant increase in housing waiting lists in starting in about December 18. So it's a relatively recent phenomena, but it has, you know, more than doubled. So we're now talking about close to 500 people being on that waiting list. As I've mentioned before on a housing presentation, what people are putting themselves down for is 1 and 2 bedroom units. And that means in all likelihood, someone else is developing the land. So it becomes a housing development issue. This is something that you won't have seen before, and it's not in the presentation. So I've just commissioned an update on the housing stock take to look at the impact of COVID. So Gisborne District is here. This side is, so this side is housing growth, housing price growth. So Gisborne has had high growth in its house price, but this part is waitlist per 1,000 in the population. So Gisborne is almost as an outlier, along with Napier City, in that house prices are inflating at an extremely high rate, and waiting lists per 1,000 are rocketing. So the two are probably connected. So Wairoa's had a good housing price increase, but it hasn't necessarily impacted down to the waiting list for MSD. So this is a graph from Shamabeel Yacob, and as they had arrived late yesterday afternoon, so I haven't had time to interrogate him on that in terms of why does it impact on us and not on others, but it's a factual statement that says that it's both. So the key thing for us is to recommend, and we've had some correspondence about this, but we want to emphasise the issue, and that is to identify the ways in which councils' rules and regulations impact on housing development. We understand the spatial plan, and we understand that that expresses a vision for the region, but you know, you need to deal with the issue that the spatial plan has no regulatory authority. It's the district plan that has regulatory authority. And therefore, you can say whatever you like about your vision for the future, and until the district plan is changed, it will have no impact on people's ability to more easily build houses or develop houses. Now, we also understand that a district plan review, which you, I think, have scheduled, is an enormous beast. But you can do pieces of that much faster than attempting to do the whole thing and getting stuck on the code of vision or some big controversial issue. So if you looked at UAGCs, if you looked at development contributions, if you looked at infill housing regulations, if you looked at Papakainga regulations, you can actually get those through in months. There are councils who are rapidly doing plan changes, as opposed to waiting and parking all of this into the district plan review. We'd like to help you to advocate to central government to look at what I know are the central government rules around building consenting. And the last bit is, and this is slightly off topic, but you're counting on some revenue coming in from GHL. GHL's statement of intent talks about making profit in order to help you be less reliant on rates. But we just want to signal that we don't think that community housing is an appropriate place in which profit should be made in order to prop up other things. And we therefore recommend looking at your community housing and ensuring that it stays somewhere where housing is the intent, as opposed to a money-making venture that funds other things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Judy.
You're able to ask questions of
Yep.
this notice?
Yep.
Thanks very much, Judy, for your presentation. 81.81, which is on page 13 of our papers today, says that there's, and I've seen this figure before, all around it, 1,410 houses defined as social housing, but that's more than Housing New Zealand. So can you just tell me where that number comes from, please?
Housing New Zealand has, I think, 1,200 of those. You have 120.
So it is only those.
Yeah. I'm reporting tomorrow to Rotipu Water, and there are plans for increased social housing from both Kāinga Ora, from private developers who are developing them and then selling them to Kāinga Ora, for iwi to develop social housing, and one of the points I'm going to make tomorrow is about looking at a regional housing authority that takes over the Kāinga order housing and others, so that those decisions about building are localised. And there are a couple of models around the country for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Next, I welcome Kerwin Anaboldi. I welcome Doug Bell. Thank you, Doug. Morning, how are you? Just take a seat, make yourself at home, about 5 minutes. And councillors have your submission in front of them so they know what you're going to do. You can just elaborate on that.
Morena,
Morena.
to our mayor and to our councillors, thank you for the opportunity to make time. I feel very special and rather privileged to be in front of all these special people, and I'm also nervous, so bear with me.
Don't be nervous. Relax.
You have my submission already in front of you, and if I could just work through that. A very quick background. I'm a landowner on the Poverty Bay Flats. I have a vineyard. I've been there for 40 years. And I felt quite strongly about this, enough that I actually wanted to present my case to you. Particularly in terms of contributing to the general rate for wastewater, stormwater, water supply. Now, I supply these services to myself. I meet with council regulations in terms of my septic tank. My water supply, I pump from rainwater tanks. So I have no use of the service which you propose to rate me on. And I feel very strongly that this isn't fair. When I have, for example, my septic tank emptied, as I need to do occasionally, I pay for that service. To then have it as a general rate on all the rural, generally rural landowners to contribute to that, I feel is grossly unfair. I also need to acknowledge that to arrive at a rating policy is an incredibly difficult process that you go through, and I don't envy your job, but there are some parts of it which I think can be factors of it that can be quite easily separated out as being within your general principles of one of them quoted, number 3 in the review says users of services can expect to contribute to the cost of operating the service. That's fine, absolutely understand that. I think that's a sensible and fair policy. I come back to that first submission I made that, you know, I'm not contributing in any way to the service that you're about to rate or you propose to rate me on. Skipping through my submissions, I don't want to be here too long. The other one that I'd really like to focus on is the issue of forestry and how you might rate. I'm on the Back Ormond Road, so I see a lot of trucks going past presently. And so there is a new form of forestry which you probably are aware of, and that's the carbon plantings, carbon forestry. And effectively, these forests, if you were to group them under the category of forests, really have no demand on roading. They're planted and there's no trucks that are harvested. They are simply, and they're locked up. The land is locked up. Now, whether you agree with that principle or not is something completely outside the rating policy which you propose, but I would expect that in fairness, you couldn't rate forestry where it's a carbon forest for road maintenance and those other aspects. Stormwater is the third and the last one that I'll touch on. Rating stormwater on a rate per property is rather clumsy because my understanding of stormwater is that it's water that falls from the sky and somehow either has to be diverted down through the stormwater system in an urban area, or on the land it finds its way to the rivers and drainage and creeks and drains. For city dwellers, that's a service that you provide, and it enables them to have houses free of water and outlying areas. I wondered whether if you were to incorporate that across all the rating areas, that would be deemed to be again unfair, because stormwater, in my case, I provide for my own drainage. Of course, I have to adhere to the council rules in terms of the drains and how they're put in place and all the consents, etc. So I just, in summary, would want to say, please be careful how you group the rating areas, because there are several of them which I feel will be, one, and most profoundly unfair, where I have to provide my own services in this respect. Okay, thank you. It's a rather clumsy approach to what was quite a simple question, but yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the opportunity.
No,
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time. Thank you. I welcome Lillian Ward. The floor is yours.
Morena tātou. But flustered coming in from the coast this morning, but kei te pai. So I'm here as a ratepayer. I pay rates for my my mother's property, as well as a staff member to go through the process of being in front of you or submitting, so that I can encourage others to do so in the community. Much like the previous gentleman, I find it unfair, unjust and inequitable for East Coast residents to contribute to paying for water for those who have the luxury of having it here in Gisborne, as well as the waste management. Much like the previous gentleman, we all have our own septic tanks. We all rely on rainwater to supply us throughout the year. And we're actually really, really good at conserving water up the coast. So I find it myself, as well as Councillor Seymour would have been at the meeting that we both facilitated for our senior citizens. They were horrified at the thought that East Coast residents would be contributing to a water supply and wastewater management system for Gisborne residents. And I know our Wainui whānau are in the same boat, but I'm here talking on behalf of myself. Much like the previous gentleman, also in terms of forestry. So I drive forestry roads daily out the Mighty Mata. And so I was a bit surprised to see what the actual amount annually would bring in if those with 20 hectares and over pay a certain amount. Quite frankly, that wouldn't even cover the work that's done on the Mata Road once a year. So yes, please think responsiveness, please think equitable decisions and how this actually might impact on our most impoverished region in, well, our most impoverished communities on the coast. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Lil.
Can I ask me questions?
So what you're virtually saying is it's use a pace.
Yes, that's exactly what I...
Emphatically use a pace.
Emphatically use a
Yeah.
pace.
Thanks a lot. Okay, are we going to have a quick coffee while we wait? So if I call, just please come back immediately, but feel free to get up, grab a coffee. Also to our residents here, please feel free to grab a coffee. Apparently there are some traffic jams out at Wainui. How are you?
I'm improving, thank you. I injured myself during lockdown picking up walnuts, so I'm coming along.
I'm glad to hear that. Barbara, so you can take a seat, make yourself at home. You've done this before, about 5 minutes where you can share your thoughts with us. And then if councillors have questions, they will ask it of you.
Yes. Sure.
Thanks a lot. Make yourself at home.
I have to bring my own cushions to things, but if you don't mind, I'll stand up
All good.
and just get
And
myself.
Barbara, just to let you know, we have all the submissions in front of us. So councillors
Good.
have your
Good,
submission in front of you.
excellent.
Thank you.
I must say, Moana is very on the ball.
She is.
Right. I haven't got anything too terrible to say to you, but I always like to exercise my right as a ratepayer. First of all, I would like to acknowledge Councillor Gregory. We have a continuing issue on Riverside Road with the poor maintenance of the between Russell Street and Whitaker Street. Recreational Services do an excellent job for the parts in front of houses, but in the olden days it used to work successfully, but for some reason things have changed, and now the parts not in front of the homes are left to get overgrown. Now there's a beautiful footpath there from Whitaker Street right round to Island Road. Now I have a vested interest in that. We got a petition up when it was the City Council, and I do not like to see it getting so overgrown that even families, with pushchairs, they can't get through. So that maintenance needs to be done on a regular basis. It's not good enough for people to have to write letters to the paper after ringing requests for services. I shouldn't have to email Councillor Gregory to get some action. So if that could be addressed on a regular basis, please. Recreational Services do an excellent job with the reserve opposite 25 Grant Road, and there's a safety fence there, and the reserve at the end of Grant Road, they do it regularly and efficiently. But whoever's responsible for the other part needs a smack on the hand. It's just not good enough. I mean, the safety rail that was put in, it gets so overgrown that you actually can't see. Yeah. Okay, now the next thing, that's my first comment. And of course, I've run requests for services to get that action, and it's so frustrating, when you see things that used to be done well are not being done well. Now we move on to the stormwater, which I have issues with because living in Grant Road, we do not have any drains, as it were, and things like that. And I actually begrudge paying for a service that we don't get. In the rate demands, they keep, we talk about, this is because I had to apply for a rate remission because I used to let the granny fat in the basement, which I don't do now, and I will not be doing again. But all the way through here, I'm getting charged for two. I begrudge paying for something it's not getting. The granny fat's in the basement. There's no extra water, stormwater runoff. So if that could be looked into, please, from my point of view. And this applies also to your wastewater rates. You see, I'm getting charged for two wastewater because there's a toilet, one upstairs and one downstairs, but the downstairs one's not being used. So if somebody could do something about that for me, please. Little things, but I bring them up each year, and that's right. Now, and I'm a bit nervous about talking about this, having read about Mr. Miller in the paper. And this is question number 7 for you, that I'd like the GDC to allocate some rates to finish the curve and channel, which stops at 29 Grant Road on the western side. Some of the road is one way at the moment with blank slippage, and we need road maintenance. Now, I've been asking for curb and channel, and that goes back, here's one here, 2011. So I hope you don't growl at me for bringing it up each year, but sort of, it's got a thing with it, but I find it uncomfortable when I get a letter back 2011. I know it's historical and the people have probably all moved on, but the office response is, submitter has for several years requested the installation of curb and channel along this road. Annual plan submissions and RFS, whilst acknowledging the submitter's concern, they have been informed there are no engineering reasons to install it along this road. The request is for aesthetic purposes only. Well, that's totally incorrect. So I hope we've all moved on from that, please, because to me, it's a genuine request that if we had a bit of curb and channel, I mean, with the number of people living in Grant Road now, we actually would qualify under your rules and regulations for curb and channel both sides and footpaths both sides. Well, don't want that. Just the curb and channel finished. And the original curb and channel was there before we built in 1968. So those are my requests, which I hope the council will smile favourably on. And also I noticed in the paper that there's been $4 million allocated to sort of maintenance things in the city. Could we have something more done in Grant Road? I can't remember when the last time any maintenance was done. The seal is breaking up. It's one way when you first turn into Grant Road. Now there's been some drop off of the bank. Yeah, so it needs to be looked at and done. We've some maintenance on Grant Road. Is there any likely to be happening fairly soon? I mean, they come down and put yellow things over the road, and I always go out and have a chat to the chaps because, you know, they're the people that have a fair idea what's going to happen. And they say, oh, it depends if the council will agree, but nothing has happened. But I always like to have a more positive thing. I did ring up and there was a pothole just when you turned into Grant Road, rang up, it was done within the week. So credit where credit's due.
Thank you for the positive
yes. So does anybody want to ask me? Some of you will have heard all this before from me. Some of you won't have, it's fresh for you.
Barbara, I'll ask you a question. I can see you've got a letter here, and I assume that's in regards to your 2 units. So what I want to ask of you, are staff already looking into not that you don't pay 2 wastewater rates for those 2 different
Not
units?
as far as I'm aware.
Okay, so that's something.
I do get a rate remission, and which I applied for, and I think they're going to streamline it rather than me have to go down to the courthouse and get it, you know, but I'm an honest lady. And you know, the other thing that I begrudge about it, I could have told Porkins and said, oh, my son's living down there. It's not me. So I'm being honest with the council, and then you get...
Hey, thank you, Barbara. Thanks a lot for coming in, and thank you for also coming a little bit earlier.
It's just a bit of luck. I was
You were home.
Yeah, it hadn't gone off early. So does anybody want to ask me anything?
Good.
Now, you don't mind me coming back each year, do you? And
No, Barbara, we
talking about, could we have something done in Grant Road, please? I know it's very parochial, and I do understand we're a big district, but I would be going back a long time before I would be aware of any maintenance that actually has been done in Grant Road. So if somebody could look into that, please.
Thank you, Barbara.
Or the other thing, this is a bit of trivia, I suppose it's not, but I don't have one of these smartphones, so I got one of these tracer booklets. I don't know if anybody's seen them, and you just write in where you've been, who you've seen.
Did you log in? You were at the Gisborne District Council at 10 o'clock on today? Have you logged in that you were here?
Oh, no, I haven't written it in yet. I do it when I get home.
Oh, when you get home, that's all good.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Barbara, and take care.
Right.
Thanks a lot. So we'll take 5 minutes, just stay where you are. I'm just going to check on our list, and then we might dig into our agenda. Please go to submission 83. We have Mrs. Carol Nelson joining us. She wasn't going to speak, but I convinced her to speak. So we'll just open up. Carol, you just relax, say what you want to say. We'll just open up.
Morena. I don't have much to say. I am obviously not happy with the wastewater, the stormwater, and the water charges, because we are out of Wainui and we don't use these facilities and don't expect to in the near future. For many years, we've been charged an exorbitant rate for a targeted rate on our property for coastal protection.
Just quickly going to interrupt, page 219. This is John's. Yep, so page 217 and 217, thank you. Sorry.
That's fine. So for many years, we've been charged an exorbitant rate for coastal protection, despite requests for services to the council over the years and letter writing beginning back in 2008, the gabion baskets weren't maintained, which led to a huge erosion event at our property last year, which in turn cost us $50,000 in resource consent, which we ended up not needing, and lawyers. Now, I have had lots of interaction with the council revenue team on rates over the last 2 or 3 years about the targeted rate at Wainui for the coastal protection. And 2 weeks before the submissions closed on this issue of targeted rates, I received a letter from council, and I quote, it's to do with the coastal protection scheme rate. This is the last year that this targeted rate will be charged. Now, that was 2 weeks before submissions closed, and I find it very difficult to understand why I would get a letter saying it's already been decided when we are having this meeting here today in front of council to decide on that issue. And that's, thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is someone going to explain to Ms Nelson? That's around a year for which it was applied.
So, Pauline.
Two things. If it said it's going to be disestablished, it should have been proposed to be disestablished. So quite right. If it has, it's something like that, it should have said proposed.
This,
right.
For the year 21-22.
the letter reads, this is the last year that this targeted rate will be charged.
Just a clarification, that is an error. It should have said proposed.
I assume that it probably should have, but I have had a lot of letters from council that I have seen that have not been. Thank you, Carol.
So we have one more maybe coming, but what I'm going to do is get down to the nitty-gritty stuff. We're going to open our agendas. If can you drink any more coffee? I'm going to grab another coffee then. We wait for our last submitter and then we're going to. What's that? 43 pages in our agenda. So this was the submissions, and I just want to make it clear, we listened to a few submissions today, but we received 189. They carry just as much weight as people that chose to spoke today. So I do want to assure people that handed in a written submission that each and every one of them were read by councillors and taking into account. But I do also want to thank the people that today came and took time out of their busy schedules to talk to us. So we are moving to our report, which is on page 2. And I just, I'm opening it for discussion. Councillor Seymour.
We just need to note the receipt of those supplementary set of submissions this morning.
We've got 2 supplementary submissions. I move that we
And
take them into account.
on the front.
That's 2. Whoever's going to move a seconder? Councillor Sheldrake, all in favour? On 3, carried. Thank you. So, Pauline, do you want to open us up on this paper, page 2 of our agenda? And that just needs to be removed.
Yeah. So what's before you, the decision doesn't come until you decide at the December meeting at Sustainable Chapter. But this is the deliberation, and these are kind of the directions within there that you'll make the decisions and forming that paper at a later. But it's summarising the main points that when having looked at the process that we have, what were the individual intentions that you were trying to achieve, and what were submissions that we had. So it's a balance trying to be before and against. And this, if there's anything that was different from what we had originally went to you, what should they be? And one of the ones that stands out was the stormwater rate. And the stormwater rate went out to say that it is for 3 years, that the boundaries are increasing, and is also trying to take into account that more work will need to be done in these particular areas. But on balance, it was ahead of what we believe we should be rating for now. And so the recommendation is within this is not to include those 500 properties within the part of the rate changes. Yeah. But they were the main things, but I'll certainly, if there's any other questions.
So I just want to remind councillors, now we're going to talk about this paper and go through it. If we maybe go through each proposal and just, there are 5, and just if people had questions or queries next to those proposals, they can be raised now. But I do want to say to staff, thank you for a good paper. It really read well. It made stuff clear. I liked what I saw in here. So we go to page 7, which is proposal number 1, which is changing the general rate. And also just reminding councillors, we have workshopped this several times. Today is not going, we're not going to go back and litigate stuff that were done at workshops. Sorry, Tony. So if you had any questions, I'm just asking for any questions. If not, we will move on to proposal number 2, which is on page 11. And we will make final decisions on these on the 10th of December at our Sustainable Tairāwhiti. So today we will make recommendations to council, which will then come before council at that day. So next we move to the forestry sector. Anyone have questions there? I did not. Councillor Seymour.
I just wanted to get into the conversation. It's bullet point 65.
Is it under forestry still? Yes.
Yes, it is.
Second to last.
And 66. And it still relates to the size of the 20 hectares.
Mm-hmm.
And I did raise it with Ms. Foreman this morning, because it seemed to me that 65, 66 and 67, it reads at the moment as if we have changed it to be 1 property, one block of 20 hectares, which of course would be multiple blocks of 20 hectares. I'm just going to find the line again so I can read it to you. It says it's an under 67. Based on the information provided to date, staff recommend that the roading differential for forestry be increased to 10 and the definition of forestry for rating purposes amended to, as proposed, to include areas of exotic forest on mixed-use farms, which are 20 hectares in size or larger. I read that to be a unit of 20 hectares in size or larger, not multiple blocks that come to 20 hectares. So if I own 4 blocks, and I read that to not include that, which is what I've nagged on about before, because this quite clearly says exotic forestry, which are 20 hectares in size or larger. That sounds like 1 block.
So this clarification of the way that it has been calculated and what it is under the valuation as well, it means a cumulative per property. So
that's not what this says, is my point entirely.
So for clarification, it is any property, the way that is calculated, they will assess what is on that property to give their overall valuation. And so that means if there are individual blocks, smaller blocks with it, they will add up to. So that is, just to clarify, that is how it's currently under the definition. Yeah.
Can I say, Madam Chair, I completely get all that, because that's what we talked about for 6 months. But that isn't what I believe the public will read this to mean. So what we need to be clear about what we're telling the public. That's all. I mean, I know exactly what Ms. Foreman's saying is what we've talked about, and I read in here that, you know, valuation can assess that, but we're going out to the public with information, and that, to me, that is not what that says.
I'll support that it needs to be clear, because I could see people interpreting that as meaning they won't be captured unless it's 20 hectares contiguous.
Thank you. I guess I'm getting clarity from Councillor Seymour and also in respect to that dialogue. But one of the submitters has noted that the ramifications of these decisions, because we have little knowledge or understanding of the subject, and let me be clear, I'm not a forestry, I can read any report, of course, and get some comprehension around it, but I just want to be clear that in respect to the 20 hectares, but also the point on page 1563, the reasons for selecting the 20 hectare cutoff were, so there's 2 clear reasons as to why. So is that again just because we make decisions based on reports from staff who have those qualifications to inform us, etc. So those 2 reasons give enough of a clarity to public in respect to our understanding of why we went into this space. That's what those 2 comments are. Do we need more depth there? Do we need to clarify more further that we made that decision? And we could, you know, we could expand on that if you like, to have people understand why we made that decision. Is there needing more depth to that space?
So there's probably 2 things. Those 93 odd properties that had a change in the definitions of mixed use forestry, all of them would have got letters to say that this is a bit of a change with regards to it. So we didn't leave it to chance, so that they may have picked it up in the general information available to the public. So that was the first part of it. But you're quite right. You have to decide at what value is your minimum amount that you would consider for the definition to be incorporated as a mixed use and therefore a higher differential. And there are 2 things that you would be considering. One, that the valuer said that maybe even if it is the amounts, even though if they're individual 1 hectares of a 20 cumulative 20 hectares, they would be captured whether it's viable or not. But when the other part of that, if there is consistency, if a value of land is highest and best use, that is forestry, and if they have the block is 10 hectares, highest and best use is 5 hectares, they will be rated for at the 10 times. So if you're getting consistency of forestry blocks within there, they will be captured. And just repeat that. So, sorry, if you have highest and best use of property as currently that it is, and if you own a property that has 20 hectares and it says its highest and best use is forestry, they will be rated at the 10 times.
The roading differential,
Yes.
10 times, yes.
Pardon me? If it's the highest use is forestry. So even though that it's under the 20 hectares threshold, they will be rated as though they had 10 times.
Can I just clarify that when you say highest and best use, what she means is it is in that enterprise now?
Is the value is, yes, based on the current information that they have. So one is that you want to obtain consistency within those types of use of the land. The second part is to say it's actually not viable for the blocks to be harvested, and in all likelihood that they won't impact on the road, or so therefore that is your limits that you'll be trying to say, is it 20 hectares or do you go up higher? So that's the kind of the different the decision makings that you would be having.
Council officer's response in point 65 is equally, with the greatest respect, as vague as that answer. And I don't think we actually know what or how we're dealing with it. Highest and best use is actually not a problem, because seriously, if you've got pastoral hill country, it has to be pretty awful for the highest and best use to be forestry. So that's a bit of a distraction. It's the issue of whether the forest is planted to never be harvested, which we don't have much of, but there is a little bit in this district. And as costs increase and returns decrease, there will be other properties that will determine that that forest will remain in pine trees and ultimately become natives or some other. So what we're saying in 65 is still not clear. And I see it says the valuation has not to date come across a record of title that states it and that it will never be harvested. And that would be true, because we don't have that yet. But I just think directly as a result of a couple of questions, and we need to address that. We need to, and I mean, we've got till next year anyway, we need to be going out to the public, being really clear about what we're saying. So I don't think we're clear about the, we understand the quantum is 20 cumulative hectares as a minimum, but this issue around forests not harvested, I don't think we actually know what we're saying. It's not clear here anyway.
So we did discuss that in some of the workshops about that, and the implication was saying if a person is going to keep a forest in perpetuity, bear in mind we're talking exotic, not talking native.
Yeah, we know that.
So therefore, it was raised, should those therefore be given a remission? But the difficulty that you have that at any point that they could harvest that, and in which case those costs that they would have otherwise had, they did not. And so then it was a decision at that point is not to actually offer it up to carbon credits that we're doing as in perpetuity. But those are the kind of decisions that when you're discussing it is there a remission available for those that are intending not to use it, and then risking perhaps the issue of them deciding to harvest that at a later date. But those are the kind of things that you obviously can decide. Shannon.
Yeah, on that point, I just guess the risk in the sense doesn't necessarily sit with the forest owner, it sits with the landowner, because the forest owner may just be leasing that land and the rates are levied against the landowner. So post-harvest, if you're trying to collect a 25-year period of rates that haven't been collected because I've decided that they will harvest after all of those rates would then sit on the landowner and on the forest owner. So dangerous.
That's a good question.
Kerry.
Do we open ourselves up to any legal issues if this is far in the future, if we do continue to gather rates for something that is never used for, and assuming that there is something that can be lodged against a title, would we then be required to remove that obligation under the targeted rate?
No, the definition is what you decide how you're going to rate for it and how you collect it as a group of owners. And so therefore, how it's directly applied to each individual owners is a secondary kind of discussion. So if you collect rates from your property for amount of roads, and then you go back at a later time and says, there was not any work done on my roads, are we liable to pay it back? The answer is no.
Do we have or do we need a definition of when a production forest has become a, I don't know what you call it, a permanent forest, and that more than a certain percentage has reverted or is no longer harvestable? What we probably need to think about that threshold, because people will want to know.
Okay, let's move on to proposal number 3. Wastewater rates for connected users. So these are the people in the reticulated areas of our city. Any questions in regards to that? Councillor Burdett, the floor is yours.
I've had numerous phone calls on this. I just want clarification because I wasn't dead sure myself. Is there to be a targeted rate across the board in terms of urban and rural areas in terms of wastewater rates?
So there's two parts to this.
Yes, I understand that.
So the first part was when under proposal 1 was a general rate. And in general rate, it says for these activities within the infrastructure, which is a lot of them are the reticulated services, there's definitely water supply and wastewater, that people will be rated generally based on a maximum of 10% for those activities. Then when we come into this targeted rate, which is the bulk of the 90%, they will only be those that are receiving the services. So there's two, yes, there are people under first proposal that will get a portion of that, whether they're reticulated to the service or not.
Microphone.
Does that mean, given what you've just said, that those people north of Tolaga Bay that have their own services are paying for a cost they do not receive?
So in terms of that, yes, for the general rate.
Come back to the issue mentioned earlier by the submitter. Is that fair or equitable?
Well, if you take a look at page 8, number 21, where B and C states how roading, 60% of roading is just paid by city ratepayers, but 75% is spent on our rural roads, and all our flood protection and river maintenance, river asset maintenance also have a portion where people that don't have direct benefit pay a bit. So what we are proposing there is quite consistent with the network approach that we're trying to do. So I think it is consistent with what we do with roading and as well with river asset management and flood control.
Madam Chair, you go to Scott Wilson's submission in here, and I've read everything. He really sums it up correctly in terms of urban people across the board, those employed in forests, those that work up in the back stockades and the whole works, all have access on those rural roads. You're saying 60% of the rates in the city, or the roading rate, goes onto those rural roads.
No,
So
75%.
So they have equal access. There are other arguments we can all put up across the board. All I want is clarity, so when I go home to explain on the radio to those people, they're in line for an increase in rating in terms of the wastewater. And if I might add, we're talking 12 months out, has the 3.2% increase we've approved been taken into consideration, plus what's happening right at present, the revaluation? So I'm saying that the rural sector is going to get slugged.
So just with this, that this was based on a point in time. So you're right, that if people valuations goes up more than others, then there will be a change in the incidence of rates. And also whatever the long-term plan decisions or budgets, they will have an impact. So this was trying to say what on principle would happen at this point in time if we did the change. So I can actually see the actual impacts to them on that particular their rates as being muddied from other decisions that may have come along the way. And I think that's part of the process that we will have to go through, and we'll be saying that what is that going to occur and the impacts during that process. The other part that you were saying, and I'm just going to remember exactly, general rates that we collect at the moment, where you, and it is a difference, there's a philosophy where you have only a user pay philosophy, which says, I don't receive that service, then therefore I don't pay or for it. But we do have, if you don't take the roading as a network, you take the flood control. And so the flood control argument there is 60% that we collect from that rate is targeted everyone generally, is what we're proposing in these particular ones. For the infrastructure rates is 10%. And so as a collection of the rates for that, it is $2 million that we charge everyone generally. Those that are closest to the flood protection, obviously you would say they get the greatest benefit. But we know one is an affordability of issue. If we applied only those that get it closest to them, we wouldn't be able to apply. So there was a balance of what is the economic benefit for the region and also affordability. So those kind of principles, when you're talking about that, are they being applied in the same consistent manner?
Councillor Farahina.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I do get uncomfortable when we start talking about urban pays for this thing and rural, and so rural needs to help pay for this thing, and urban, all of those kinds of things, because as someone who was growing up urbanly, but also experienced much of my teen years living rurally, I feel the same in terms of both. And I think that's kind of where I'd like to encourage our table to kind of keep our conversation, and that we're speaking about applying this, and we're thinking about applying this rates kaupapa for the benefit of the entire region, and for us to all do this together. And yeah, individually there will be some uncomfortable parts, but collectively I know that there's the will and the want to do that across our entire region. I do think it behoves us also to have that conversation with our constituents. I've had people approach me about the wastewater rate and go, hey, I don't think that this is fair. And then when I kind of explain, hey, that it's about our region kind of doing this together, one-on-one individually, actually those people kind of go, oh, okay, I understand what you mean. But I also kind of explain as well too that it's not just the people that are in the urban area that complain to me about the whole wastewater network. I get raked over the coals in regards to outfall into the city bay in all of the rural areas that I go to. So that shows the will that there's this will across our region that wants to get that done. We don't have many mechanisms at our disposal to get that done. This is probably the key mechanism to do that. The discussion isn't about whether or not it should be done, because I think the will is to do it together. It's the impact on those people that come through, and I think that's where we need to keep our conversation. I'm comfortable with where it's at, because in proposal 4 we're taking out stormwater for key areas. That was the biggest thing that I found really, really hard to have conversations with those that aren't connected to the stormwater. Like there was really, really long, and I mean in terms of specific, Ray, it's a really long bow to draw in regards to having that convo. So I'm glad that that's come through in regards to Rockpool, but I'll save that conversation for them.
Councillor Downsy. Just wait a second, we're just giving everyone an opportunity to have their go. You've had 4 opportunities already, so we're just giving everyone that haven't spoken yet. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm heavily in support of the principled reason we've made these decisions around the network structure and spreading the cost amongst those who see the benefit in the wider sense. I don't put much stock in the argument that Councillor Burdett raised, particularly in consideration of his many times he's supported the rebuilding of the Peel Street toilets in the city for the use of the for the use of his community when he comes to town, but not wanting to contribute because they don't have access. Whereas contrary, we have excellent access to the rural roads. It's not an argument that speaks to an actual network. It's around desire to pay. And I personally would love to see us model in a future year a entirely user pays structure and see how that sits and get a taste for it. If we knew our baseline of user pays, we may make decisions across a broader range of changes. But with the methodology we've used for our rates to date and with the structure we have in place, we've decided that this is the fairest way to balance rates in this current format. And so I'm comfortable with the reasons we're doing this, and I'm comfortable with the percentages we've allocated.
Anyone else that haven't had a go yet? Councillor Gregory.
Can I just ask on page 11, where there's, if council's concerned that the impact of the proposal is too great, blah, blah.
What number?
Sorry, 34. And then it goes down to it could be reduced to 5% and leave the stormwater at 20%. How does that pan out with the stormwater changing?
So the existing, so it said if you don't accept the current proposal, just leave the status quo, or alternatively, the general rate, if you believe that 10% across the whole 3 of them doesn't stay, then you could reduce 5% for water supply, 5% for wastewater, but stay the same for what it is currently, which is 20%.
Thank you.
Councillor Sheldrake.
Yes, I'm in general support of what's proposed. We've got a big region. We've got everyone to consider. The pie's only so big, and so it's down to how we're going to allocate it and percentages. And I think we workshopped this pretty hard. So it's interesting reading it and seeing how this is rolled out. So that's really where I sit today in a COVID life for our community at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Worsnop.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this area, which I refrained from because you did say at the start that we were not going to relitigate things.
Can you just get to the point, please?
Sure. So I'm going to respond to the fact that you've alluded to the fact that it's very similar the way we're treating water to roads, and I just want to say that I completely reject that for the reason that no one locally anywhere has to supply their own road. They only contribute via rates to a network that we all share. So if rural people were required to supply their own wastewater, stormwater, etc., and then in addition help someone else with theirs, I see a distinction in that. Our submitters have spoken quite clearly. You had the majority who spoke up against this. So I think while obviously the table is generally in favour of this, I think that we need to acknowledge the fact that the majority of our submitters were not. And I continue to believe that this policy is neither fair nor transparent. And if the intention was to take more cost, it should have been applied to roads.
Councillor Akwater-Brown, Councillor Seymour.
Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just sitting here. I did write a heap of notes throughout this morning's submitters speaks and echo a little bit of Councillor Dowsing's notion to use of pays based on the fact that there was strong sentiment around people stating emphatically they did not want to pay for something they did not get, which in human nature thankfully makes sense unless you think of life through a different lens of generosity, say, or thankfulness or gratefulness or collective impact of how we do our region well in our governance roles and everything we do. And so I was a little bit, I guess, disheartened by some of the rhetoric of, you know, how do we do this together as such. But I was very grateful for the report from Manaaki Tairawhiti, and in one of their addressing the impacts, they have a specifically asking of council, and I just wanted to ask in respect to the fixed rates and replacing them with general rates based on capital value of property, because capital value is out of our hands. We don't get to dictate to that space. It's a government framework, and so capital value doesn't matter what the income of that family is earning to the capital value of their property, which is difficult because of our region having a number of people that don't earn significant income. We know this, you know, so I'm wanting to ask about our consideration to the ability to pay. With a user pays, what will we do for users who cannot pay? You know, and you know, all of that sense. So I'm just, in summing up, what I'm trying to say today is that have we considered the UAGC role in this region with general and targeted, like, is there a mechanism right now for us to truly be doing an honourable job to those who cannot pay, the affordability issue, and get those who can pay to understand that there are metrics and frameworks that they get the benefit of. When they pay their huge tax bill, they get GST, they get other metrics and benefits that they can support their incomes as such. Well, that's what I was told. We pay GST, we pay for things in our wills, etc. But I feel like in my region right now, there's still not a quite clarity around how we pay for things for the benefit of the whole and how we do life here. It's not easy, but how are we clarifying our decision to do this when we're trying to say, I happily pay for roads if it means my residents in my region can safely get to school, to work, to play on a road I will never drive on, but if I know that they're safe as they drive that road, I feel good. So public good, public empathy, public wellness for this region, is that a framework that we propose enough of, so people get that? Because I just sense that there's just those who are adamant that that's just not part of what they do with their rates, and it's kind of a little bit sad for me. But I just, that conversation with regard to that paper, I think it's valid and it's worthy to consider. Kia ora.
Councillor Akwater-Brown is getting any answers to her questions, Madam Chair.
I think it was more a statement than a question.
Thank you. I think it is a really retrograde step if this council thinks that the issue of roading is not a network, and many people, it is absolutely essential for provision of service to our district, for people to get to work, and it's always been, and there's yet to prove a flaw in the argument that the roading is a network. And I need to remind you, it's not like people might not want to make a contribution. They are actually paying for 100% of their own water supply and 100% of the treatment of their own wastewater, be it into their septic tank or their new wastewater system, and the collection of that and the disposal of it. So I think it is very disappointing to see an analogy to be trying to be created. And it bothers me if you look at page 821B in the second paragraph, is that suggesting that 44% of the $1 million was going to be collected. It says 56% will be collected from general rates by urban ratepayers. So that would suggest to me the other 44% was going to be directed at the rural townships who have no benefit whatsoever from the particular service. They might benefit when they come to town, but the point that's been missed is they are paying 100% of their own costs. And in support of Councillor Burdett's questions at the beginning, we didn't have many township meetings on this, but where we did, the townships were completely opposed to it, as you have had one representative of the community come in to share with you this morning. So I do think it is really punitive. I know what we're trying to spread the rates, but I just think it's an absolute backward step to think that we can start charging out, and it's particularly our older people in the townships. I haven't heard too many complaints from the pastoral farming sector. They just roll their eyes and see GDC at it again, sheeting home rates to high value capital properties. But it's the townships where our people are on absolutely fixed incomes. And you've already had figures provided for you this morning that show the lower income of our townships and then of our Maori community. So it's those people that we are significantly impacting on something. They've got to repair their spoutings, maintain their water tanks, and then potentially pay for the delivery of water if they run out. So there's a whole lot of cost on low-income people in townships if we pursue this particular decision. And I don't support it.
Thank you, Councillor Seymour. Councillor Robinson, you're next, and then Councillor Faulkner.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. I couldn't easily find the table, but I definitely read it in there, which showed for the lower value properties, the decrease under this proposal was not insignificant. And I'm assuming that would be captured by, that would capture a number of the townships. But in respect to Councillor Akata Brown's question about do we have a mechanism in place? We do, we have a remission scheme. If people can't afford the rates, they can come and ask us for a significant refund of remission. So at the end of the day, we do have a mechanism in place to address affordability. Not to mention central government supports for housing, etc., etc.
Councillor Faulkner.
Councillor Robinson just touched on the ability that we have as an organisation to respond to individual ratepayers touch on. But my comment more is to the effect of the business of council and how we pay to do the business of council, because we are in the business of infrastructure and services. So we're a bit mischievous to suggest that we can somehow cut away what we offer to our community, what we are required to offer to our community by way of services. And I would challenge anybody to show me where to draw the line on what we offer to our community. So whilst I, as a rural ratepayer myself, might find it difficult to swallow a large rates bill, at the end of the day, we as a council need to run a business. So where do we cut our cloth is probably the challenge. And who around this table is going to draw the line on what we don't offer our community?
Thank you for that. At the end of the day, we have this discussion every 3 years where we acknowledge rates can be a blunt tool, and we try to say, let's do it fair, and everyone's interpretation of fair is different. So for us as a collective, 14 people around the table, what we are really trying hard is to be transparent to be consistent with certain principles so that we can then hand on heart say, this is how we arrived where we are at. So I do want to acknowledge this is complex, this is not simple, and it will not align with all thinking around the table because 14 different opinions. I'm a rural ratepayer myself. I do want to acknowledge everyone for the input here today. It is difficult discussions to have. And I want us to be honest and like the honest feedback we got today. So thank you also for all councillors coming here today with their rural or their urban or their region-wide hats on to bring the voice from our community, because in the end of the day, we need to decide how are we going to cut the one pie that we have. Today's discussion is not about what money we in, it is how we will cut the rates pie. Any more discussion around this? I lost track where we were at. What number were we at? 3. Let's just quickly move. Can someone just remind me where we were at? 3, Coral? 3. So it's the wastewater rates for connected users. So that would only be urban dwellings. Any questions around that? Not at this stage. All good. So then we move to the changes to the stormwater rate.
Barbara talked about her getting pinged for a basement thing. How do we accurately capture those scenarios? How do we define, how do we capture data which says actually within this house, the basement's been used as a separate dwelling and therefore is going to be charged that? And then at what point, because I read Hilary Sampson's submission, which talked about their property at number 6 Itanui Road, was originally 2 flats and then was put back together, but she seemed to be saying that they were being charged 2 charges as well. So are we, yeah.
So there are 2 things. If it's a separately used and inhabited part, which is one of the examples that we had today, there was a separate flat that could be used separately. So therefore, that is rated as having access to a lot of the services. And so therefore, if there are lines that it's not being used for that, so it's a granny flat or it's not being used or any particular, they can apply for a rates remission. So, and we usually, what happens is if a new build occurs, you have to get a building consent. It's either lodged at that kind of point or we get it also from the valuations. And they say they value the properties based on the capital improvements on there, and we get that information as well.
Supplementary your question, is there a process which is readily available to the public or readily known to the public where a person could come in and say, well, actually, I bought this house, it was 2 flats, I'm converting it to 1. Can you please fix it up in my system so I don't get this? Do we have that system in place?
Yeah, we go back, if they notify us of that, then we can go back to the valuers, they check and verify it, so there's an independent verification, and then we adjust accordingly our information.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Worsnop.
Just in response to that Beetham submission, obviously this has a reasonably large impact probably on not just Beetham but a number of other
hospitals.
Yes, and I would really support a transition.
Good.
I think it's necessary. They probably are not opposed to the fairness of applying, you know, especially when you compare it to who is currently paying a lot more for that service so that they can have it for less. Just we need to make it manageable for them.
I support that as well, a transition for organisations that will suddenly, they've already set their budgets for next year, so I support as well that we transition that in as we've done in the past, as proposed in the paper. Good. Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I absolutely want to also endorse what Councillor Worsnop was saying around smoothing and staggering for organisations that have already set their budgets. And I do want to specifically mention paragraphs, 92 and 93 in regards to unintended consequences for the Makaraka, Nelson, Cameron Road area around the proposal and the stormwater rate, and noting that those 500 or so properties have been removed from that. I really commend that happening.
Any more, Councillor Burdett?
Most that rang me don't have an issue. When I explain to them, if you have a drain outside your place and it gets cleaned occasionally, sometimes once in 10 years, you still have to pay a stormwater rate. It is the quantum of this new rate that's being proposed that is troubling people.
Is there any appetite around the table to look at the 5%, 20%? So what I'm asking is, so my understanding is that we decided to be consistent, where we bring down the stormwater rate from 20% to 10, and then have the wastewater and the other water. So it's a consistent, principled approach, where there is the option mentioned by staff in this paper where it could be a 5-5, but then stormwater stay at 20. And I do think in the end, they do nearly cancel each other out anyway. And then it's not a principled approach. The bigger increase. So I'm just asking around the table, it was mentioned here by staff and we haven't spoken about it before. And I don't want us to leave here today feeling that we didn't have the opportunity to bounce ideas around or just dig into it properly. What opportunity did you miss? Well, it's mentioned here that staff can take a look at that. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's what I was just saying to respond to that. I mean, clearly, some of us do not support the 10% across wastewater and water supply. But we could, if that could be lost, then obviously we would support 5%. But it is about the quantum that it's going to impact on a small number of low value homeowners. So yes, is the answer to the question. Is there appetite for considering it? It is certainly better than 10%. So yes, 5%, 5%.
I do believe we did modelling on these figures, and we certainly did have a robust discussion at the workshops previously. I'm personally happy with the 10-10-10. And again, if people find it's unaffordable, there is a mechanism to address that $158 extra.
Public are very low to say, I can't afford my rates. So we just have to be mindful of that.
On that point, Councillor Seymour, if the public are low to say I can't afford their rates, then how are we supposed to model on an assumption that people can't afford their rates? We have to model on the assumption that people can afford their rates and they choose to live here, and this is part of the cost of living here.
Councillor Farena.
Thank you, Your Worship. In response to the question that you asked around if there was appetite around looking at 5%, if it had not been mentioned in this paper, then I would be going forward with the things we had already discussed inside of our workshop. But because it has actually been mentioned by staff, that tells me that there's an appetite from the organisation to bring that back to us, and that there's that gives me the indication that that is a possibility. So I'm comfortable with the information coming back to us in regards to 5%.
Fallen, seriously, Foreman. Can you just talk to us about that and what quantum of work would be
So in terms of what we did, we were trying to give you, were there alternatives for you to think about? Yes. Okay, and the second preferred one, if you weren't taking the consistent approach of 10-10-10, which is the preferred,
yep.
Because there's consistency of way we're applying that, was to say that you could actually reduce your roading UABC.
Excuse me.
And reduce that down. So therefore, that would be applied across all properties.
Yeah.
throughout the district, not just within the city boundary. And then you would apply a general rate for that new amount that you, the shortfall.
Yep.
Basically, it goes from UAGC to general rate. So that was the other second preferred option. The 5%, and the 20% was because it actually perhaps wasn't consistent with the overall activities and what you were trying to apply for the general services, and it was an interim measure. It wasn't the actual preferred, but there was to give you to think about, was there other options for you rather than not on the table at all.
Thank you. And, CEO.
Through your worship, so that just in terms of that reference was, as Ms. Foreman was saying, in terms of the option provided, that was where, by way of, if you're concerned about the impact on higher value properties. So overall, on balance, the preferred approach was to keep it as at the 10, because that would benefit the lower values as well. So if you refer to section 35 around the preferred option that staff have put forward.
Councillor Seymour. Anyone else wants to speak? No. Councillor Seymour and then Councillor Worsnop. Thank you. Just microphone, thanks.
But so why do we ask the public to come and tell us what they think about it if we aren't going to listen? Because we've had quite a lot of feedback on that. I'll just leave it there. If I'm just looking at page 4 and the recommendations, which we're going to come to, and D. So can we just explain why we're not extending the current area of benefit of the stormwater activity? Is that all? Was that in the fringe of the
RE1?
Is that also meaning we're not applying the same rules to them? Can someone just tell me what that really means?
It was identified when they were applying the rate for modelling purposes to extend the boundaries based on what was in the definitions of the revenue and financing policy. But those people hadn't currently been targeted that rate. And so when it was 574 properties. So this also review was over 3 years, and it was trying to signal that some of the areas do receive more of the stormwaters, but some don't. And so what we were coming back as the recommendation is actually keep it at the status quo, but review as the stormwater network grows, how you capture the properties that are rated for it.
Sorry to be done, but what is the status quo then for those properties? Are they nothing? So they weren't going to be charged the same as rural townships?
Sorry, they would have a 20%.
So they would be
That's
charged.
the status quo. That was the twin quo.
Thank you.
So my position all the way through is that wastewater has been the most problematic, and by and large, the reason I have such opposition to having 10% just taken out is because the rural community, a lot of the people who this cost is going to be introduced to have not had any say on the system that has evolved. They have not contributed to that conversation because it hasn't been something that their rates contribute to. So now that we already have our plans, we have our costs coming on board in the near future, and they're going to basically piggyback on that without having had any say in it. I would strongly advocate wastewater being 5%, even if the others stay at 10, which would, the wastewater is double basically the value of both of the others, and it will potentially continue to get larger because of the nature of the plant and the resource consent conditions, etc.
Councillor Akwater-Brown.
Thank you. I'm still, there's obviously, thank you. There's so much in this, and we've had these workshops and you kind of sit in here and hear a little bit more, etc. So regarding wastewater, Pauline, I asked you this earlier too, and I rang council staff actually, because septic tanks get emptied into the wastewater treatment space. Not all, I'm sure. But today someone said that they pay someone who to collect it, and then that person has to pay. And I was wanting to know in the sense of rating or paying for disposal. Is there a better mechanism in that sense? Because there's someone paying someone to do that in respect to, and we're trying to, do this rating system for wastewater, storm, or the three water issue we have. So I just thought, is there a better way in the system of paying for or rating for? Because you've got people that pay someone to do something that then pays council, etc. So could that be something, I don't know, that can be worked on respectively?
So currently, the disposal of the wastewater, while there is a user fee and those people that have for that service, it is not the full cost of that. And so effectively, it's not the full cost because of the lot of the additional overheads, and the actual per unit rate is a lot less. So one of the options would be, if you were to saying that it needed to be, was to increase it significantly. So I know there has been models, say like within the Wairarapa, where they have increased the disposal of that cost to reflect the representation of the overheads and the full cost back to the users. What happened in that, it changed the behaviour of the use. It probably wouldn't here because we're maybe isolated, but it definitely did. So what would happen in the councils where they were reflecting it, those other trucks would take it over into Wellington to dispose of it, because the cost was a lot lower than what it was in the individual councils, even though that cost was supposed to be reflective of that apportionment. So there was a change of behaviour.
Something that works for our townships, or, because I'm thinking in terms of the rural townships who don't necessarily have the backing of a big rural business to pay the rates. Now, there again, I acknowledge that those of us who run rural businesses already pay a significant rate. But if you don't have the income available to you to pay the rates that we need to increase services to reflect the rates.
So just to reiterate that this is discussion as who's the share of the pie.
Yeah.
And so who should pay what of those services and what proportion. It's not, unfortunately, a direct relation to some of the services that you have. So yours deciding as a principle who should pay. And it may not increase. So for argument's sake, when the general rate for the flood control protection went for a 60%, didn't necessarily mean that those that were furthest away from the flood protection actually got more of a service. It was just the decision who should pay. That becomes the second part of it. What is the service and what is it you provide as part of the long-term plan process?
And I get phone calls regularly to my office of people saying, I do not use the library. I want you to refund me the fee. I do not own a dog. I don't want to pay the $23 for the dog. So like I said before, quite a bit of our rates are not exactly tied to a specific service. We try to get it better, but it is not a perfect science. And we try to be fair and we try to do it as efficiently as possible, but it is not always as straightforward as tying it directly to a service. Mrs. CEO.
Sorry, through the chair, just want to correct my reference to the incorrect paragraph before. In terms of where that approach was going, it was exactly as Ms. Woolman was saying, around a principled approach to decision-making with regard to how to share or distribute the rates. There is an option, which is why, by way of process, that sustainable tide awhiti is there to enable us to do further work if the collective is feeling needs to look at more of this, or there is also the option for you to consider the recommendations that are in front of you and make a decision today. So I think that's open to you in terms of where you might want to go, but lifting it back up to the principal discussion as to why you distributed the rates in that way initially through your workshops, and then considering the hearings and where you collectively might want to go to, we can accommodate that going forward.
Good. Okay, let's just go through the last one, which was the inner city one, and then we can come back. Page 20 of 422.
Chair,
Councillor Burdett.
I feel as though I've got the knowledge to speak on this one because I was around when we approved it. We've since done away with Tourism Eastern. We've since done away with the Heart of Gisborne and given that responsibility to Trust Tairāwhiti. Collectively, all these organisations, not the Eastern Community Trust at the time, supported this request by the Central City business people. Yeah, it's a long time ago. I just feel, having read all those submissions, that they need to, or we need to consider where they sit on this, because it's them that's paying. And at the time, just for clarification, it was suggested that it would be for the Christmas parade and promotion of the Central City. I mean, if you knock this on the head now or in the near future, what's going to replace it and who's going to pay is something that needs to be sorted out.
Thank you for that. We're just going to take a quick break. We should have taken the break just before now. Just take a quick coffee break. They've brought in some food, 15 minutes. talk again.
My own view is, despite our staff having been to talk to these people, the businesses themselves need to make that decision, or if they are in a position where they can't, I suppose we have to decide who's going to pay for those activities they had, or whether trust hierarchy is their responsibility. Because we've charged them with a type of activity now, more tourism things. But certainly the business of the day, they came here and got approval for that rate to go on and supported it. That's probably over 20 years ago now.
Thank you for that, Councillor Burdick. Councillor Dowsing, Robinson, Sheldrake.
Thank you. I personally thought I wasn't going to come around to supporting this, but through both the submissions and the work we've done, it's become obvious that it's not particularly fit for purpose and not meeting the needs. I don't think that this is the end of city centre support or providing for this type of activity. It's just that the mechanism we're using to rate for it is inappropriate. And we need to broaden our scope of what we support and how we support it. But yes, I'm in favour of removing this rate and addressing our needs of the future another way.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson, Sheldrake, Akwater Brown.
I totally talk of that, but the only query I have is the timeframes for what we put in place instead. A couple of submissions referred to this being resolved in June next year, or something coming into line in June next year. So totally agree and support with withdrawing the funding charge, but just to make sure we don't leave a hiatus.
Thanks for that. Councillor Sheldrake.
I concur with that comment, and I think, you know, if it was created 20 years ago, it's a very different look. Well, 50 years, the city centre, you know, who's in this, who's not in this, and how does it work? So it needs to be resolved.
Thank you. Councillor Akwater Brown, then Seymour.
Thank you, Bishop. I guess, yeah, having been mostly a user of the CBD and hanging out in that space and seeing some fabulous contributions by businesses, new and existing, I wasn't sure, like, what are we saying in respect of removing this rate? And in the last paragraph of the statement from the TT paper we got today, however, there was no consensus on how this would be funded or what shape that would take. So I still sense a bit of ambiguous kind of uncertainties, but I wanted to look at this as an opportunity, I guess, to consider others who might want to get involved in CBD vibrancy, and because we do have such creative energy at times. And I do want to do a shout out, if you like, to Lana, who has been a key contributor to orchestrating a whole bunch of activities. But I think there's others that would love to also see themselves involved, and I'm thinking even schools. There's opportunities for the CBD to be ours as a whole region through mechanisms, be it planting poppies for Anzac Day throughout the CBD and daffodils throughout it, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to ask up front, in removing this, this rate, will it just mean dialogue will be around who's going to pay for activities in the CBD, or like in respect to the region itself as a whole? So we're taking it away from a specific group. What could it become as to the bigger region's role in CBD?
So there's 2 points. The removal of the rate, the way that it's been targeted, and the services that is being delivered are at a mismatch at the moment. Okay, so that's basically what it was, which was saying the way that that targeted rate is formed is only in a very narrow area, and because of that, there's also restrictions on when sometimes they can do the services. So they're trying to make sure that the services occur within that area, but when they do that, then there becomes anomalies such as they can not function. The businesses within their roads are closed. And so it's working against in some cases. So the request to remove it was to say that's no longer fit for purpose. The second part of the discussion of what is it that you want to rate, or is it a wider collective, comes through the long-term plan process of what is it, etc. So it can come through there.
I had Councillor Seymour next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mine has sort of been asked, but I think it hasn't been answered. It's the last box on page 40 under the reason for choosing the option. And it talks about, we'll consider new and improved ways to support and promote business. I want to know when that will be done, please. And I mean, it is consistent with what's consistent in the absence of anything in the TT document as well. So we're not going to rate for it, but nobody seems to know quite what we're going to do in future. It's all a bit vague.
So the two parts of it, and the Chief Executive can correct me if I'm wrong, there is a contract still up to March 22, so we've got an obligations to make sure that we are still providing that. The second part of it is if it's no longer fit for purpose for a targeted mechanism where we collect the rates at the moment, it could be how we apply the other rates which we collect tourism, and it's done in the same sort of mechanism there. So it's not necessary that you actually have, this is the mechanism to collect that 180k, well, less the camera, but you would say, what is the shortfall and how will you rate for it, which probably aligns with other rates that you've already got.
So supplementary, thanks for that. So you're saying there's a commitment to March 22, did you say? So next year then we're going to come up with a better scenario. In the calendar year 2021, we're obviously going to be looking at what's going to happen going forward.
Yes.
Okay, no one else, Councillor Farihina.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I do want to echo on behalf of the business or the business owners' feedback in that city centre management and promotion area. They were, if we do look at the Trust Tairāwhiti document that was just tabled today, there's general support actually for retention of the rate, and as is reflected in the report, it's because they see value in the things that are run in the city centre. I do support the removal of a rate in order to make things clearer and more consistent, because when we have all of these targeted rates all over the place, it has unintended consequences. However, I do, similar to what Councillor Seymour was intimating, there needs to be some surety for those CBD owners or business owners in the CBD that there are going to be things delivered there. They've echoed support for the current staff member, for Lana Davey, and the work that she's been doing. And then it's been fantastic. They've all seen, while they haven't seen direct economic benefit directly into their businesses, they're all saying that the public good, the social good is great for them as business owners in the CBD. So while I do agree in principle with what us removing the rate, I do also think that it behoves the council to ensure that there's surety around delivery of something in the CBD for public good and for the benefit of the public. Those things that are being talked about in there, like the Kai festivals, like the Christmas parade, etc., etc. I'd also like to, when we start having those conversations about surety, I'd also like to promote that we involve our Gisborne District Youth Council in that. The Gisborne District Youth Council are our rangatahi council, right? And I think it does behove us to have a conversation with rangatahi about what that city centre is going to look like and how we're going to do those things. And just maybe elevate that relationship just a little bit more, because they're our youth council. Those are my only 2 points.
Any more questions? Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. The city centre
vibrancy thing has gone to Trust Taurapere, yep. So it's no longer under the council. So why do we need to worry about it going forwards if it's not with us?
It's still with us. What we are deciding for the next 10 years is that if we will rate people for that specific rate and then pay the money over to Trust Taurapere.
Oh, okay. So what are Trust Taurapere going to do then? Do you know?
It's up to them. It was extra. CEO. Okay, Nadine.
So through your worship, I think there's further discussions that need to be had with Trust Taurapere in terms of the best for region outcomes and their wellbeing framework, and what council contributes to and what they may pick up. So the submission is quite vague in terms of what it might look like going forward, because I think there's more water to go under this bridge in terms of working that through with your partners in region, because there is the other question that has been raised around the total economic development funding that's paid across to Trust Taurapere. If we were looking at best for region outcomes, arguably we'd be saying, well, maybe that's something that's been picked up, but we would need to work that by them, but we would need to work that through to an agreed outcome.
Any more questions, queries on that one? Councillor Wharenga.
Yeah, thank you for that, Madam C. So on that note, would it be sensible for us to also smooth out removing this rate? If there's an appetite in the CBD that they still want this thing to be delivered and we don't quite know what the next thing is, for surety's sake, wouldn't it make sense to over time reduce our collection of that rate in the CBD and then have it replaced with something else, rather than stop it and then have an unknown chasm, and then with the view of a maybe, yeah, it's that thing there. Wouldn't it make more sense to smooth our removal of this rate out?
I think it would be more administratively complex to smooth out rates. But also question, I mean, I think this has been proposed on the basis that it's not fit for purpose. So a fundamental review is required, given that we've got contractual obligations to Trust Taurapere. It does buy time for a considered effort to figure out what it is that it defines the CBD now that we know that CBDs are changing, the areas change. You know, for example, when there are food festivals, the shops are closed. So, you know, there are things like that that we need to work through a process rather than phase it out. My preference would be that we agree to a time frame within which we'll have resolved this, so that there is some certainty. Yeah.
I'm absolutely comfortable with that. Work it out and then remove.
Michelle Drake.
Just a question, how many businesses pay this rate, please? Roughly? 218, so on the sheet. Oh, 80. 280. So on the schedule here, there's 15 businesses attended. So that tells me that it's pretty small percentage if I really, really wanted to be paying that rate and I was driving it. And some of those businesses have 2 people from the one organisation on the list, and I wouldn't say, and some of those names definitely aren't like retail. So I think it definitely needs a serious look at.
Thank you for that. Okay. Okay, councillors, any more discussion, questions, queries? Now is your time. I think we've given it a good thrashing, Councillor White-Brown. When I say questions, queries in relation to the paper, please, everyone, focus on the 5 areas. Thank you.
On page 3, there is a second paragraph, alternative options discussion space, and I had underlined Of the alternatives, staff prefer a reduction to the UAGC, as this would benefit lower value households regardless of their location and access to services. That statement kind of, I guess I was wondering in our preamble and discussions whether we need to go back to that consideration based on a lot of the submitters' discussion today into our further meeting on this. But I just want to appreciate the staff working harder to ensure affordability and the impacts on those who have low incomes, who haven't had significant change to their incomes and access, etc. So thank you for that. But I just, when I read that statement, I sense we're trying to meet a number of what was submitted today, particularly from Manaki Wharewhiti as well. And I just want to say that with our current government being instated now, our lobbying role, I guess, is some part we can push forward to as well. So, Nami, kia ora. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, Councillor Aquata-Brown. Okay, well, then I take you to page 3. I can. Okay, I'm not going to read them all out because it's a long 2 pages. But what I will do is go number 1. So do I have a mover for all of this? Coral, it's Councillor Dowsing and Councillor Seymour. Okay, number 1, all in favour? Contrary, carried. Number 2A, which have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections to number 2. All in favour? 2A, you're not a pain. 2A1, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2A2, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2A3, contrary, not contrary, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2A4, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2A5, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2. Well, then you need to say that before we vote, because it's not fair on Coral. So who voted no? Where did you vote no and you wanted noted? 1 and 4. Thank you, Coral. Or snob. Just number 1. Councillor Burdett. 2A6, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2B, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2C, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2D, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2E, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2F, all in favour? Contrary, carried. 2G, it's just a little change there. Note that extension of the multiple residential properties targeted rates remission to include the targeted stormwater rate will be considered as part of the rates remission policy. Just remove the words the following. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you, councillors, for a robust discussion today. I'm really proud on how we bring our different opinions and our different feedback from our community back here, and we try to have a collective view, because in the end of the day, what was that? Anyway, thank you for that, because in the end of the day, it's a collective view. Anywho, I do declare this workshop closed. Thank you.